I'm Kier from In Defense Of, a podcast member of the Gonna Geek Network, just like the one you're listening to now. The opinions expressed are those of each individual. Check out all the other podcasts at GonnaGeekNetwork.com and get ready, because geekiness begins in 3, 2, 1...
Welcome to Better Podcasting, a show where we talk about podcast tips, tools, and best practices to help you succeed with your podcast. What makes us different? Well, just like you, we podcast purely out of the love and fun of it. Podcasting is our hobby, and we recognize that it's yours too. We always encourage your questions and feedback, and you can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. Here's your host for the show, Stephen John Drew and Stargate Pioneer.
Hello and welcome to episode 37 of Better Podcasting. My name is Stephen John Drew, and with me today is the wonderful Stargate Pioneer.
Yes, the one, the only, the wonderful Stargate Pioneer. I'm back after a lovely vacation, a little bit of business travel, and even from podcasting from a closet. So I am glad to be back in the Stargate Pioneer studios, joining Better Podcasting once again live.
That's awesome. And we should take this moment here to mention that, we are, as we've kind of alluded to, on a bit of a rougher summer schedule right now. SB has to go away. Then I literally an hour and a half ago just returned from a family wedding, which was out of town. So keep your eyes on geeks.live, because we'll post on there the schedule. We've got some other things happening. I think we'll still be back to Fridays primarily. I think most of our summer stuff is out of the way, but sometimes it happens. And as hobby podcasters, you absolutely adapt, and so be it. Those who can make it live, make it live. Those who don't. But thank you, everybody who do watch us live. We do very much appreciate that. And if you don't watch us live, no worries either. We appreciate you watching us and listening to us anyways.
We do. Anytime you have a chance to check out Better Podcasting, or for that matter, any of the GonnaGeek.com shows, we heartily appreciate all of that. And if you ever have any question and you can't catch us live, don't worry. Just send us an email, send us a tweet, get us on Facebook, and we will be cool with that. So, matter of fact, since we don't really take questions while we're live on the podcast, probably be good for you to do one of those three things.
For sure. Other thing that I want to quickly mention here, by the way, is SP, you did allude to it. You did yourself a bit of videos while you traveled, and you did a few for Gonna Geek, but you also did one in response to a question on another Facebook group, didn't you?
I did. It was a video of basically how am I? Are we talking about the closet?
Oh,
the
yeah.
Podcasting
The sauna one.
The sauna one, yeah. But base closet sauna, it doesn't matter. Actually, it does matter, because a closet would have been filled with like clothes and stuff to baffle and everything. This was a sauna, hardwood sauna, cedar wood sauna. So you have sound bouncing all over the place. So what I had to do is I had to take my bed blanket and I put it up over my head, up over the microphone and everything. And you know what? You could still hear sound bouncing off the floor coming back up. I'm like, no, I tried my hardest. So, hey, listen, there are a ton of sound treatments that you can do. The first thing is to get a dynamic cardioid microphone, because a condenser would have been deadly in that room. If I had a Blue Yeti, that would have been bad.
You would have heard the rustling of everything too, of the blanket over your head. But I just want to say that I love how you still did videos on the road, even though you were dedicated to being where you were at. You took some time, you did some things, and they were just fun to watch. And that's why you should absolutely follow SP on Twitter at twitter.com/Stargate Pioneer and watch him there, because he will keep you all up to date with all of his travel happenings.
And we'll try to entertain you. Podcasted from a sauna, podcasted from a rest area, podcasted from a boat. I was podcasting, short little video recordings, and they were just meant for fun and everything. And the boat one was great because we did that, by the way, for Gonna Geek, the main Gonna Geek show.
Yeah.
And it was funny because my son went out in the boat with me. I'm like, hey, you want to come out with me? I'm just going out to do a quick video, and then I'm going to come back in. He was like, oh no, totally, I'm gonna go out there. And I knew exactly what he was gonna do. He was gonna mess with me. So we actually did about 6 or 7 takes because he jumped in the water, rocked the boat, and then came to the other side of the boat behind me and put his head up at the end of a couple of videos. And I had some choice words to a couple of the endings of the videos, and I think we edited it all out for the one that was actually produced. But I was like, come on, man, I just want to do this and go back in. But
that's really funny.
Yeah, there's a bunch of fun stuff that'll happen. You just again, you got to roll with it. You have to have fun with it. This is fun. Even if you're doing it for professional purposes, if you're not having fun, go find something else that you're going to have fun at, because there's a ton of stuff to make money at. You're going to be good at several different things. Find the one that you are having fun with and just go with it. But we're talking about hobby podcasting. We're trying to have fun hobby podcasting. And that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, cool. I've got this new gear. Might as well put it to test, have a little bit of fun of it, and then keep myself awake on the drive too. That was part of it. It's like, I got this long drive ahead of me. I'm just going to stop a couple of times and have fun. So that's the fun that you can have on vacation, or just leave it all at home and forget about it. Recharge your batteries and come back and have a good time. But then something that both Steven and I have noticed, when you come back, you will forget about 90% of your stuff that you're supposed to do before you go live.
Absolutely. It's been like 2.5 weeks since we recorded Lost Better Podcasting. It's amazing. It's just boop, out of your mind. So that's okay. It is what it is. But hey, let's go ahead and get into our main topic. Here we go.
Yeah, it's a big one.
All righty, SB, what do we got going on for this week?
It's kind of a big topic, kind of put to the top of my head because of Podcast Movement and several of the articles that have happened in the first half of the year, and then what happened at Podcast Movement. In general, it's more for the professional podcaster, not necessarily for the hobby podcaster. So I was thinking, what exactly is the impact on the professional industry, radio, professional podcasting industry, whatever, on the hobbyists? So I did some looking into a lot of stuff. First, let's set the stage. For those of you that might not know, that haven't listened to Better Podcasting before, or don't have a grounds in the history of podcasting, podcasting kind of sort of started back in 1999, which was when the first portable digital audio recorder hit the stage. I forget what model and whatever it was. It wasn't an iPad. It was something, or an iPod. It was something else. But 1999, this is 2016. It is only 17 years old from that point. But that's not true podcasting. So then you have to fast forward a couple of years, and this guy by the name of Dave Weiner actually coded what is now known as RSS 2.0. Mm-hmm. And that was solidified back in 2002. Some people wanted him to make changes. He said, no way, it is set. And that's what we're going with. And it was mostly for blogs back then.
Yeah.
But in 2004, in September of 2004, it really took to the streets with podcasting. And that's when Adam Curry utilized it. A bunch of articles were written about it. So September 2004 was the birth of podcasting. I believe the actual date is something like September 28th or something like that. I think
so.
But so that is when podcasting started, September 2004. It's 2016 now, so it's only 12 years old. So that is the history of podcasting. Now, quickly, we're going to fast forward 12 years. We've actually talked a lot about these articles that I'm going to quickly go over, but we need to say them again in this podcast just to set the stage. So you take a look at all the great statistics that have come out in the past like 6 or so months, and basically listening continues to increase. Bridge Ratings had about 3 articles come out in the past 6 months. And what Bridge Ratings are is they are, quote unquote, a leader in the media consumer behavior analysis. So they're basically looking at consumer analysis for advertising, for trying to get the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. So they're coming at it from the professional standpoint or the industrial standpoint. On June 1st, 2016, which was their latest article, they basically surveyed about 3,100 study participants. And it came out that the average has listened to 5 podcasts in the past 30 days. And then the average listenership of that was 33 minutes per the past 7 days. So
nuts.
Most people listen to about 33 minutes worth of podcasting in the past week, basically 7 days.
We're a lot more. Let's be perfectly clear there. We are a heck of a lot more than that.
We are, whether it's just our own stuff or whether it's stuff we're interested in or other stuff on the network, on the GonnaGeek.com network. Yes, we do listen. Both Stephen and I listen to a lot more than that. Heck, we participate in more podcasts than that. So on March 3rd, they released, this is back to Bridge Ratings, they have released, and that said podcasting has grown 25% over the past 5 years. Now, this title is a little bit misleading because basically what they're doing is they're looking at CPM rates and total money spent. So that dollar amount has grown 25% in the last 5 years. Interesting to note. But they also said that the number of podcast listeners have grown by 8% in the last 5 years, which roughly equates to 2% a year. And that falls in line with some of the Edison research, which we'll get to in a second. So on January 26, 2016, Bridge Ratings released a study. It basically said that the main audience for podcasting is the 18 through 34-year-old audience. And that in 2016, 19% have listened to a podcast in the last 7 days versus in 2015, when the study was published, it was only 9%. So basically, you're talking about an increase of 100% in a prime advertising demographic. So everybody's all of a sudden saying this is tremendous growth. Maybe we can make a run at monetizing this. Now, wait, that is not all the statistics that have come out.
No.
Blueberry released an article earlier this year.
It was May 17th.
May 17th, and they said that mobile listens are at 72%. Now, that's with mobile browsers, that's with mobile apps and everything. 72% are with your smartphone, which anybody has a smartphone. Not everybody. I know some people, matter of fact, the instructor of the course I took last week didn't have a smartphone, but most people have a smartphone. And that 72% of the listens of the entire podcast industry that Blueberry sees was coming from mobile devices, and that iOS was about half of that, 46.8%. So that is a lot of people listening through their mobile devices, and specifically a lot of people listening through their iDevices. Now, Libsyn statistics, they put out new statistics every month, every other week with Libsyn's the feed, it comes out. But Rob Walsh from Libsyn did a presentation at Podcast Movement, which included some historical look at the stats. And there was one slide in specific that I was really looking at, which was the total median numbers or the average numbers over the past 4 or 5 years. It's been pretty steady at 2,000. Yeah. Hasn't gone up, hasn't gone down. But you take a look at the total amount of podcasts, which has increased. So therefore, the total amount of listens have gone up dramatically. According to Rob, smartphones were at 35% in 2010 for Libsyn. I have to assume with Rob, this is all Libsyn numbers.
Yeah.
So we're at 35% of all listens were smartphones in 2010. In 2016, 76%.
Jeez, that's crazy.
So in 4 years, it had grown over 100% to decimate the market. Everybody's listening through some sort of mobile device. And the median download, so that's the average number per podcast that's out there. Not the median, meaning half is less than and half that are more. So it's right in the middle. It's not the average. It's 173 downloads per episode. So after 30 days, if you have less than 173 downloads per your podcast, you're doing not as good as 50% of the podcasts out there. And if you have more, you're doing better than the bottom 50%. That's what that means. So if you're trying to gauge, I just left that in there in case you are listening to this and you're taking it out of context. That is where to gauge where your podcast is. But remember, the average number of download per podcast is 2,000.
Yeah.
Now, Edison Research has a couple of things that they published over the last year or two. But basically on May 26, 2016, they did their latest study on podcasting, and the percent that has ever listened to a podcast is up from 11% in 2006 to 36% in 2016. So that's an increase in 200% over the course of 10 years. That's pretty good. And then the percent listening to a podcast just within the last month is up from 9% in 2008 to 21% in 2016. So in the course of 8 years, it is basically almost tripled, doubled and a half, basically. So that is pretty good. And then to go back to Tow Center for Digital Journalism released a study on December 5th, 2015. It was somebody, I believe, doctoral thesis, and I can't remember her name off the top of my head. I want to say V something, Vanessa. I can't remember her last name. Anyway, it was a research study, and it looked at angles to actually monetize podcasts. So there's a deliberate effort that somebody had sponsored research basically into looking at what are the best ways to actually monetize podcasting. So there is a lot of look into industrializing, professionalizing, and to make money basically off of podcasting. So that is all the statistics. Now we're going to get into the actual business of podcasting. And we've talked about all these before, but I'm just going to run down them really quick. The latest one was July 7th, 2016. Audible released the fact that they are going to try to monetize podcasting. Now, it's not large scale, it's on mini scale, but they are actually entering into the monetization of podcasting. This was the most curious about everybody, but SoundCloud announced, or Twitter announced, that they were investing $70 million into SoundCloud, which was very interesting to me. So there is a podcasting angle to that, podcasting advertisement angle to that. There's a music angle to that as well. But that's a lot of money into a company that has lost about that amount of money the past 2 years. So somebody's desperately looking at a way to monetize something. Scripps acquired Stitcher. EW Scripps acquired Stitcher from Midroll on June 5th, 2016. That was announced.
Which is interesting because Stitcher is one that's been through a couple of acquisitions. I think this was the second one in the last 5 years. So it's interesting to see that happen from a standpoint of why was the one company willing to let it go, right?
Deezer was the other company,
Deezer,
by the way.
Right? Yes.
Yeah, and they let it go. I have no idea, but EW Scripps, which is an advertisement firm based out of Cincinnati, Ohio, announced that they were buying Stitcher, which has all sorts of questions to everybody that has podcasts on Stitcher from one shape, manner, or form or another. I am very curious as to how that is going to roll out. Also, a big announcement, which really started last year but wasn't enacted until April this year, was Google got back into the game, and Google Play Music actually had podcasts out there. It wasn't in beta anymore. It was actually out there April 18th. Now, it's limited release. It's only on Google or Droid devices, or a desktop, and it's only in North America. I don't even think it's up in Canada. I think it's limited to the United States.
It's in Canada. Yep.
It's in Canada now. Yep. So it's limited to North America, and they are slowly growing it out. But it's not like it was a big announcement. Google didn't come out and say, hey, look, we have podcasts.
No.
They just made it available. And of course, with Google, some of the stuff that they put out, they don't plan to monetize for a while. But the fact that they got back into the game to be a competitor for iTunes was very interesting indeed.
Yeah.
Now, talking about iTunes, back in early May 7th, 2016, there was a few articles out there that said the top podcasters in iTunes met with Apple, basically, or iTunes or whatever. And this is nothing new. I've heard of meetings that have happened before, but the fact that this was big news, that it was leaked out and that everybody thought it was big news. Nobody knew which the podcasters were, but everybody knew that 7 of the top podcasters met with Apple. that was big news. Yeah, for the audio listener, Stephen just pointed to himself, and he was not one of those. He was just making a joke. Tim Ferriss, who a lot of people know because of his 4-hour work week, big into the entrepreneurialism, rocketed to the top of the charts in iTunes. And he put out an article, basically, how I made it to the top of the charts. And April 11th, 2016, Dan Carlin, he's been working for years, but his hardcore history, he releases just a few a year, maybe 6 or 8 a year. And they're long. They're like 3-4 hour podcasts. But people eat them up. And then he's got like the first 47 or so for sale right now in iTunes. You can get them for like $1.99 or go to his website as well. So, I mean, the fact that people will pay for a podcast, that's big news in of itself. And he's making a lot of money off of them. Everybody says, oh, Serial put podcasting on the map. Well, no, it didn't. But the fact that it brought story podcasting to the forefront again was a real point in time. So that happened last year in 2015. And then a lot of people know John Lee Dumas with his Entrepreneurial on Fire podcast that has been very successful. So there are examples of really successful podcasts. Mark Maron's WTF podcast had Barack Obama on it as well. So there have been successful, notable podcasts in the news in the past year. Now, if you get back into the industry, NPR put out an article on May 26th saying they expect to more than double its podcast revenue in 2016 than from 2015. And they do a lot of the NPR style podcasts that are, like Serial or like the news or stuff like that. And a lot of people NPR is NPR. It's like PBS, people give money to them to make content. So they have a basis of which to actually design podcasts for the audience, their listener. And I think that eventually will lead to a good monetizable number. And then, of course, in 2016, we had the predominant industrial podcast for podcasting happen in Chicago, Podcast Movement 2016. It was their 3rd year. Before that, there had been New Media Expo out west, where it was in Vegas or LA area or whatever. That has gone by the wayside at the moment. I guess they could always bring it back, but as from everything I've heard, Podcast Movement is where it's at for the future. And the point there, lots of industry stuff there. The big podcast media hosts were there. Podbean was there, which kind of surprised me because I thought that they didn't care anything about what happened in the United States. They're a Chinese-based company, but they were there. Stitcher was there. Spreaker was there. Libsyn was there, Blueberry was there, and Force. So you had a lot of the media hosts there, but you had a lot of the gear there as well. I believe Zoom was there. And we had one of our hosts from the network, Cody Guff from Game Life Balance US. He went there in his capacity from WGN. So he was covering it from an actual journalistic standpoint. And he was telling us a lot about the stuff there. So it was very much in industrial. Here's how we can help you make money or how to enhance your money making in podcasts. So it's like, okay, where's the hobbyists in all this? Well, it's not as easy as you might think. There are still some hurdles. On February 18th, 2016, the Wall Street Journal published an article which basically said, we have doubts about the money making of podcasting. And this is from a big investor standpoint. So that was an interesting article. If you haven't read, all these links will be in the show notes, by the way. This will be an unusually long, Better Podcasting show notes, but that link will be in there. So if you want to read that, go ahead. And then we covered this before, but back in February, there's some disagreements about what actually to count a download, because downloads equal CPM equal money.
And this is nothing new. Let's make that perfectly clear. This is something that is huge hurdle for monetization and anything like that, because really the download definition is something that is being debated by people. Some people think that it's absolutely okay to count a certain amount of repeat downloads just because certain people do listen to things in different ways. Some people are saying, no, it should only be uniques, right? Like it's something that has been a big hurdle for a very long time. And some people go partial plays, some people go full plays. Like, it is something that will be a very long time until it is 100%. There's basically a norm established. Even among the big players right now, anybody who tells you that there is a consistent norm is not telling you the truth, because people will absolutely disagree. Some circles think one thing, some circles think another.
That's right. Now, talking about circles, we're going to talk about the radio circle, because that is where a lot of people have felt a little pressure from the industry before, I guess, the hobbyist podcasting or the podcasting industry. They're like, this is our pond. We've built it. We want to play in it. Stay out of it. Well, guess what? Radio is coming whether we want it to or not. Now, there's been a couple of impediments. First of all, there's been the whole download statistic thing that they're like, okay, we have 5 million people in the Atlanta area where we are broadcasting to in the morning drive time. Well, no, you're not. And even if you are, they're only in the car for an average of 22 minutes. So you're not getting them for a full hour or two or your entire show. You're only getting them for a specific amount of time. So you have to think about that as well. However, radio and podcasting have been kind of off and on best buddies. The New Media Expo had often been conjoined with the National Broadcasters Association meeting or convention that had occurred. They tried them basically in the same building last year, although on opposite sides of the building. The New Media Expo was basically the forgive the term here, for bastard stepchild of the Broadcasting Association. But the important part there is there was a lot of technology that was brought to those broadcasters at those conventions that podcasters could, in fact, take advantage of. So there was some goodness in that. However, this year with Podcast Movement, there was no broadcasting there at all. It wasn't radio, it wasn't TV, it was specifically podcasting. And radio came. And then there was this article that came out right after Podcast Movement on July 11th, 2016, and from Jacobs Media, talking about the radio involvement in, or participation from the audience in Podcast Movement 2016. So guess what? They were there, they were listening, and they are interested in going forward with podcasting. And also on May 19th, a little bit earlier than Podcast Movement, there was an article basically on how these podcasting pioneers plan to reinvent radio. And Stephen, do you know a little bit about that?
Yeah, what it is essentially, his name is Jake. I never know how to say his last name. Shapiro, thank you. Jake Shapiro was going to launch a new company that its target focus was to essentially bridge the gap between podcast and old school radio. And that was the idea of this company, because he recognized that, yes, there is a clear division down the line. There's old school radio and there's podcasts. How do we bring the two together? And that, of course, made waves because somebody was officially, from a business standpoint, going, yep, let's bring the two together. And this is my business's focus, is to bring the two together. And of course, radio people got on their radio or on their radar, because they're like, no, we're old school. And then the podcasters were like, no, we're podcasters, stay away. So it was kind of a interesting thing to be announced, and not a lot of development in that since May. Not a lot of change, but interesting nonetheless. And I think that another article that came out was in March that kind of also shows some of the shift here that we've been seeing, was that one we touched on before, which was CBS announcing that they were selling off the radio arm. And that's another great indication that there is a change in consumer consumption, because they obviously, radio is not yielding the profitable beast that it once was for CBS.
Yeah, and it's the potential profit. They're taking a look at the industry going, we're not making enough money to upkeep just the infrastructure here. So long term, we don't want to be a part of that anymore. Maybe somebody else can make money at it. But the model the industrial model that we have had over the course of the last decade, 100 years really, is no longer going to work for us. So we're going to have to sell off that arm in order to maintain our profitability. And then there have been other examples, other articles over the past few years, so this is nothing new, but on January 4th, 2016, Stephen Henn, who has been a big person in NPR, published an article of why I left NPR, and then I'm off to doing something new. Now, I have checked. I did a simple Google search for his name, didn't find anything, so don't know exactly what he's up to.
Yeah.
But I can only imagine it is creating either a company like Gimlet, where they're doing creation of time-delayed content, or he's looking at the creation of a singular podcast or a podcast network itself, or something to do with podcasting would be my guess, but I don't know exactly where he's landed right now. And then we have an article linked from June 7th, 2016 on the future of podcasts from Strategery.
Yeah.
And basically there's a ton of articles like that. Don't want to spend too much time going over that specific article. There's a lot of fallacies in some of these articles because they're focused on one thing or another. They might be focused on bad information. They might be focused on the fact that Serial resurged podcasting. One of the great things, if you have a chance, we've linked it in the notes. Rob Walsh's podcast movement speech has about 10 to 15 slides, I didn't count them, on the fallacy of the resurgence of podcasting, because every few years he hears it again. It's like, no, if you take a look at the Edison research, if you take a look at our statistics from Libsyn as well, it's been a steady incline over the past 10 years. So go away. There's no resurgence. It's actually just growing at a constant good 2% rate per year. So that's cool. Now, we've set the stage. We took an awful lot of time to set the stage. We've gone over stuff that we've gone over before, but that is because we need to put this in context for better podcasting, right, Stephen?
Absolutely. And what we want to talk about is there's all these people coming in. There's all of these big eyes on the podcasting prize. That's what the stage was just said. Look at all of this plethora of articles, all of this plethora of analysis, professional people or professional industries and professional companies, advertising companies, things like that, looking at podcasting. It has been such a change if you do look at it compared to where it was even 5 years ago. And where does that leave the hobbyist? Because you're listening to this because you are a hobby podcaster. And where does that leave you? Because if you look at all of this mass articles and everything like that, a lot of the tone is almost like, oh no, the big players are coming into podcasting. Me and my podcasting about Arrow isn't going to make it. No. We disagree 100%. And there's a lot of people out there who do disagree with that, because the professional folks, and when I say professional, I mean like the professional broadcast folks, the people who have been doing this sort of thing for a long time elsewhere, i.e. radio, i.e. I guess you could kind of call some of the TV talk shows, things like that. Those folks trying to get in towards the podcasting industry, they're trying to crack that nut. You are somebody who started with that nut cracked. So you're actually already in the podcasting industry. It's all about how do you still capitalize on that with more of these folks coming into play there. And honestly, yes, right now the industry is in a lot of flux. There's a lot of companies that are buying each other. There's ones that are starting, ones that are falling, i.e. Blab. It is something that I personally think for the next year or so, especially, we're going to see a lot of this stuff happening. People are going to come and they're going to be like, all right, let's start this company that is geared towards X, Y, and Z in podcasting. And 6 months later, you're not going to know who those folks are.
Pretty much. The Blab thing was kind of a surprise to me because of all the capabilities. I thought for sure it's going to be around. Well, the company that Blab is part of might still be around for a while. They're focusing their efforts on other things. But the point is, you're going to see the rise and fall of services that are meant for non-podcasters or that podcasters are using or meant for podcasters. So you're going to see that. You're going to see companies buy each other out. You're going to see different business models come and go. So there is a lot of flux in the industry right now, and a lot of it is going to be cruxed on how people can actually make money doing this thing. So hitch your wagon to the horses that you think are going to be more stable longer. For example, I host my podcast on Libsyn. I do so because, I have to pay them. I get great service from them. The RSS feeds don't drop, and I get great statistics. Podbean, they've been around for a while. They've stabilized their platform. I look forward to seeing what they do in the future. And they have semi-decent web pages that are used. Matter of fact, a co-host of ours on Gonna Geek. Chris Farrell uses it for ATGN, and the web page setup that he's got is pretty good there. So, and Spreaker, I use Spreaker for its actual live streaming capability for audio, because not everybody can stream live video. That was one thing that I learned the last couple of weeks when I was out of the home, is if I wanted to watch a podcast, it would eat up my data. So if you can get an audio stream versus a video stream, it's going to be a lot less data. And I know a lot of people do that. A lot of people are actually stuck doing that. So, hey, Spreaker, it is. Stitcher too, for that matter. I mean, people can stream on Stitcher, just not live. So in any event, you have all this stuff going on. And Stephen, we've gone through a revolution sort of kind of like this back in the 1980s. I just want to point this out. When cable started, when we went from broadcast to cable, and then you had these professional channels like ABC, NBC, CBS, whatever, Fox, but you also had upstarts, and including the local cable access channels. Now, a lot of those still exist, but remember back then, and since you were kind of a video film student, you probably were paying a little bit more closer attention to this than not, but people actually tried to put together actual presentations, some actual programming through that, and try to make it big. And I have one example of somebody that I know that actually did it. Joel Hodgkins of MS3TK, Mystery Science Theater 3000. Back then, I grew up in St. Paul, Minnesota. He started his MST3K at KTMA, which was a local access broadcast channel, but he basically started in local cable access channel, and then he made it big. So there are examples in the past where this is done in a like resurgence of technology. So just keep that in mind, that this sort of stuff is not new. It's just happening because a little bit of advancement of technology. You have the internet, you have personal computers, which make the video and audio production doable on a home account. But
I want to give a quick example too of something that actually is exactly what you're talking about, the cable resurgence and sort of how we went through that cycle. I know he's a hot topic for some people, but Leo Laporte, he started on Screensavers, which was a show on Tech TV, and now he is a recognizable podcaster name. Like I said, hot topic, we'll leave that alone. But I think that it's a great example of somebody who has actually been through both sides of the business, as far as cable access, like you're talking about, and now podcasting. So yeah, you're absolutely right that this is something that has been happening for a while. So what do you want to ask yourself as the hobby podcaster? Well, let me make this clear. Don't put your blinders on there and don't go, okay, well, I'm already podcasting. I don't care. What do I care if CBS is dropping their radio network to get into podcasting, which is not technically true. Don't do your research on CBS. That statement is not true. But let's say that you're making that assumption. Well, be aware of what's happening, because as SP said, there are changes that will come up, and you definitely want to make sure you do direct yourself appropriately. For example, if all of a sudden people are coming in and they are putting a focus on making a podcast a certain tone and a certain direction, and all of a sudden this new sort of field to podcasting takes off, and all of the mass consumers start to get familiar with this tone and direction. I don't know what it is, but it could happen. Somebody comes in and you sit there going the old way. Well, are the consumers going to be used to that? I will give you an exact example of how this has changed. Back in the day with podcasting, you could absolutely get away with having a podcast that was recorded from a cell phone on your table, a bunch of people gathering around it, some crackling, some laughs, you can of Coke or whatever it was that you wanted to open up midway. You could get away with that. But the industry has changed. There is a lot more people on there. There's a lot more professionalism with it. And that is now something that is mostly deemed unacceptable. Even people call it unlistenable. So those people who still operate that way have a really hard time now getting traction. And that's what you want to be aware of, is what is going on in the industry. Because if all of a sudden these quote unquote professional people or I don't know, what should we call them? I don't like the term professionals because I feel like there are a lot of podcast professionals, but that's anyways. It's beside the point. If they all of a sudden come in and change things, you want to make sure that you are still in line with that, because if a consumer is used to something and they're used to higher quality production, and now all of a sudden they come over to your cell phone table podcast, they're probably going to leave pretty quick.
I'll give you a great example, Stephen, just in micro increments of technology. Since you and I started listening to podcasts, doing podcasts, if you wanted to listen to a stream of a podcast, first you went to TalkShoe, then you went to Ustream, and then now it's at Spreaker, YouTube, and Facebook Live, right? We're doing Facebook Live. That's the next evolution in that. If we hadn't paid attention to the evolution and we were still on TalkShoe or Ustream, nobody'd be listening to us, at least not in the volume that is possible, and streaming to YouTube through either YouTube Live or Hangouts on Air. So that's just a little micro example of something that is in place. And if you take a look at my videos that I did for Gonna Geek, I was able to get great sound, great video using my cell phone, which was actually mounted on a tripod, and a dynamic cardioid broadcast headset. And not a chat headset, but a broadcast headset. And that is paying attention to the evolution of technology. And bing, I was able to do all that on a hobbyist budget with gear that I could take in a backpack with me as I'm going on vacation. So just some examples of what the realm of the possible has changed into since podcasting began 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Other thing that I think is solid advice is to make sure you continue doing the podcast for the reason that you're doing it now, which is fun. If you're a hobby podcaster, you're doing it because you're fun. Fun is something that a listener is going to want to hear. They want to hear a podcast that people sound engaged. They don't want to hear somebody who sounds like they're being forced to do it. And what you want to be aware of is these folks who are coming in from radio and from other things. Radio is a business. Radio is something that they make a certain amount of money. And if they're going to start to dabble in podcasting, you can bet your ass that they are absolutely going to want to make money off of it as well. They are going to want to capitalize on that somehow. Now, you are having fun and you've already pushing that through to the listener. Somebody who's coming in and trying these different formats and things like that, it might not necessarily come off the same to the listener. So make sure you do continue that engagement. We've talked about that before on the podcast. Continue having fun and engaging your audience, because if you put out a good quality product that is engaging, your audience will grow. Somebody who's coming in from radio, if they have a different motive for it and the hosts are not necessarily having the most fun with it, it might show. And what's going to happen? Is that listenership going to stick around? Okay, you might get some of your radio audience coming in now, getting into podcasting or into that podcast, but it's not the podcast audience getting into that podcast.
That's right. And then take a look at what these professional, industrial, whatever you want to call it. I mean, we had an old episode where we had problems actually defining what a hobby podcaster was, but take a look at their podcasts and what they came through. Matter of fact, I started listening to a podcast, The Stuff I Missed in History Class. It's a phenomenal podcast, but I started at the beginning. They have like 500 episodes or something like that. I started on a road trip listening to the beginning, got really hooked. We'll listen to one after the other, after the other, after the other. And it was a great podcast. It was quick, 15, 20-minute podcast. Fast forward to the latest episodes, and I did listen to a couple of the latest episodes. They're longer. They're 30 minutes to an hour long. And they have ads stuffed all over it. There's like a 5-minute block of ad that's in the middle of the podcast, which I get it. They have to do to keep up their production value and to pay the people. Oh, and the people have changed too. So that'll be interesting to figure out the whole history of why the hosts left and whatever. Maybe they just, moved on with their careers or something like that. But the point is that the ads in a podcast can actually turn somebody off. And if you're starting with a podcast, if you're just beginning with the podcast industry as a hobbyist, you actually have an advantage. I mean, take a look at DVRs. I mean, nobody actually goes through a DVR, and unless they can't find the remote, they don't watch the commercials, right? They fast forward through the commercials. It's a time saver. Sometimes it's a lot louder. It's just annoying overall. And I have noticed some of the commercials have regained their production value, because you have to have good production value in order to actually be watched. And a good commercial, I'll actually go to YouTube and watch it at work or whatever, because I'm like, oh, I missed that and want to see what it is. And then we have a laugh about it and we move on. So that is cool. But podcasting, if you don't have ads in it, you actually have an advantage over the big boys, right, Steven?
Absolutely. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody ever say, well, I don't know about this podcast. There's no ads in it. Maybe I shouldn't listen. I don't think I've ever heard anybody do that or say that they missed the ads. So you're right. I agree 100%. If you don't have ads, it's an advantage. Now, ads are not necessarily a disadvantage either if you do them right. I would suggest if you start to do that, again, think about it. It's probably a business, tax stuff, seek a lawyer out, all that good stuff. But if you are going to do that, don't make it overwhelming, because I will tell you that if you go from a hobbyist level where there are no ads to inserting an extreme amount of ads, it is going to be very jarring for some of those listeners, because they're used to your flavor of ad freeness. So be aware of that. The other thing as well is look at this whole industry movement as an opportunity to really just pull up your socks, because there are more ears now coming in. We talked briefly about the fact that there are broadcast professionals trying to work their way in, and they might have a certain different tone to it because they've got a different end motive. But if they are bringing more ears to the industry, these ears are people who have heard radio and professional broadcasts. And let's be completely honest here, that traditional radio broadcasts is a certain standard. That standard has been there for a long time. Yes, you can find stations and things like that which are maybe not as professional as others, but there is school for this. There is a whole history of having a professional program on the radio. And if these people, like the radio industry, start to bring these ears in, they are aware of that quality level. So you want to make sure that as they start to hop and check out some of the other podcasts, because they'll start, oh, I really like this podcast. What else does these podcast things offer me? And they'll start to go over there. And if you got your socks pulled up a little bit higher than somebody else, it might be a little more familiar to them.
It might. Now, in the bottom line with hobby podcasting, we've said it before, we'll say it again. Have fun. Enjoy it. Enjoy learning, enjoy hanging out, whatever. Make sure your audio quality is up to snuff. If you're expecting to grow in downloads, if you want more like 30 downloads or something like that, make sure you get a good quality product out there, but make sure you have fun with it.
Yes.
Because if you're not, you're going to be like, oh, this is so much work. I just need a break and whatever. And I'm not talking about like a vacation break. I mean, like, I need a break of like months, and then you pod fade and you never come back again. So make sure it's fun, because if it's not fun, you'll just think it's a chore and you won't do it, because you're not getting paid for it. You're paying money to do it. And hey, I want to do some fun. Like, I want to go bowling and drink beer, or I want to go water skiing, or I want to do whatever. I don't want to do this for fun. Well, make sure it is fun, and then you'll want to come back and do it. And it is fun for Steven and I, and that's why we do better podcasting.
Absolutely. But I know that's a lot to take in for one episode. Like SB said earlier, there was a lot of setup for it, but we felt it was very relevant to sort of recap a lot of the events. So it didn't sound like we were just making things up, just randomly making up the fact that this is happening. No, it is something you want to be a little bit more aware of. I personally have a very strong opinion that people who do podcasts, every single one of them have a desire to grow. I feel even some people may have the expectations of, I want to get 5 more listeners a year, whatever. Some have it as, I want to get 500 more a year, right? But everybody does this, I think, in my opinion, because they want to grow. They do it because it's fun, but they do also have that drive to grow the listenership even just a little bit. So you want to be aware of all of these happenings, because you do need to have it just, you got to basically be familiar with this and have a pulse on it, so that you do make sure that you can continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into what you had to say, which is in the better pod back. All right, so better pod back this week. You actually heard how we came up with that term in the previous episode in our clip show. It was basically off the cuff and it stuck. Maybe one day we'll do a proper welcome to better pod back intro, but not yet. It's been a little while because if you didn't gather from our jokings the previous week, we did pre-record that episode before, which was actually recorded about a week prior to that. So it's been a couple of weeks since we've had a chance to talk about your feedback. And let's start with one that came in way back in the lovely day of June 29th. We had Jeremy Dennis, who does listen to the show. Jeremy, I'm just going to go ahead and read it out because I think that it speaks very well for itself. And what Jeremy said was, "Hey guys, I love the show and wanted to share something that my podcast did recently that could count as a promotion, but was also done as a part of a fundraiser. My podcast is the Transmissions Podcast. We are a show all about the Transformers franchise, with particular emphasis on the toys and comics. You mentioned buying an ad in a comic book as an option for promoting your podcast. What we did was a little bigger than that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, they did. We recently commissioned a variant cover of a comic book. So we won't get into the rest of it because it gets kind of into comic speak. But what that means is they went to a publisher who puts out comics and they requested that they do a different version of a comic book issue, a different cover on that. That's what a variant is. And some companies do a lot of that. It is, if you're not familiar with comic books, it's a very normal thing. A lot of companies do multiple different covers, different sort of different way to collect comics sort of thing, different way to advertise, I guess, the issue, things like that. But that is a very normal thing in comic books. And that's what they did, was they went and they requested that IDW Publishing do a variant on a Transformers comic, which I think this is great. I just want to say it's a great way to relate it to your said topic. It's a great way to capture some of that audience because that, your subject matter is something of interest to the people who are seeing this comic because they're interested in Transformers, which is what your podcast is about. So it's a great way to bring the two together. And I'll go ahead and put some information in the show notes about it. But I think that it's a smart way that they could have done that.
Absolutely. And you know how Steven usually has his bell that'll give off and stuff like that? Well, guess what?
Oh, God.
I'll give you the triangle, the first ever triangle, Jeremy. There you go. And I had a chance to listen to his podcast. If you are interested in Transformers, it is very lengthy. It is in detail. It is down to the nitty gritty of everything Transformers. So go check them out. That's the Transmissions Podcast with a capital M in Transmissions Podcast. So go check them out. It's great if you are a Transformer fan, which I actually happen to be. So it was fun to find this podcast. But Jeremy, that was a great idea. I love it. I actually thought about it for my own podcast. I was like, I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't think that I could afford what Marvel or what DC would charge for a variant. So I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that. But what a great idea. Thank you very much. And that was in response to two podcasts ago, or actually 3 podcasts ago, when we were talking about distribution and promotion, and that was a very unique way to promote. So we really appreciate that. We also talked about in our last or 2 episodes ago, we talked about specialty episodes. And as Stephen alluded to, we did do a clip show last time since neither of us were available to record an extra episode. We wanted to try to pre-record, but we just couldn't fit it into the schedule. So we're like, hey, we'll do a clip show. And I want to give a little pod back on that myself.
All right.
Because I put together most of the clips. So if you have any umbrage with the clips that were chosen, come talk to me. It was me. But I put it together and it took like a full 5 days, not like a couple of hours a day, but like whole days where I was busy doing something else and I was stuck somewhere, and which was all good that it kind of happened that way, but it took 5 days to put that thing together. So just FYI, if you're ever putting together a clip show, don't think that you can put it together overnight. You're going to have to put it together over time. And if you liked the clip show, please let me know.
Absolutely. And you can do that through a variety of ways, including send us a tweet at BetterPod, find us at facebook.com/betterpodcasting, or email podcast@betterpodcasting.com. And I actually have a little Better Podcasting, Better Pod back, whatever about that. And I have to say, I'm so glad that you did that, because I went and, I got the easy end of it. I just went and I grabbed the time codes that SP provided me. I put the video in there. I really, the easy aspect of it. And as I was going through, I was like, damn, I am so happy that I now have a DBX 286. I'm so happy that I've played around and dialed it in. I'm so happy that I've adjusted my levels, my gain. I love it. I am so happy to hear this. And then I go and I'm like, okay, let's just preview this, because who knows what I messed up while I did the editing. So I went and I previewed it in my car, and I'm like, At the time, SP had a Sennheiser E935. I still had the BP40, but going through some Behringer products and some other things like that, completely not dialed in, some after EQ. And there were episodes in there that I was like, I don't know that I can tell a difference in my car. So I think it is a great example about how, yes, the right listener with the right headphones, with the right situation can tell the difference. Because as I edited that video and put it together, 100% every single one of those clips, I could tell the difference between what you and I use now and what we had set up back then. But in the car, there were times where it was almost exactly the same. So I think it is a great example about how all of the things that we've talked about that we have upgraded before isn't necessary. It is something that we do for ourselves for certain reasons, such as our live broadcasts, but it is a great real world example about how it just gives you just a little difference. And so don't get caught up on the gear. That's what I want to say.
Yep. ATR 2100, AT 2005, great to start out with. If you want to move up to the DBX for live shows or whatever, go ahead and do that. Also, the noise gate. I mean, there's reasons why. Yeah. I mean, we don't have to noise gate in post-production because we noise gate up front. But a lot of people will say, well, you missed some things with that. And that's true. You do. You miss the really small, faint things that are in the background. But for the most part, since we're live, it's what we do. So there you go. Had a ton of fun actually putting it together. It was a ton of work, and hope it worked for you. And oh, by the way, talking about the ATR 2100, we have to end the podback section with one more podback from our pal Diami Paloki, who on June 28th tweeted not only us, but at Bill Griggs and at Kelvin Ringgold. And they were talking about their great ATR 2100. And he said, I love mine, thanks to at Better Pod. So way to go, Diami. Again, congratulations for winning that, and way to use it.
Really fantastic microphones. And yeah, there are better ones. Like I said, there are things that will give you a little bit better edge, but overall, if you don't own a microphone and you're wanting to start, buy it. You know what? Right now, as we record this, they're on sale on Amazon for like $45. That's really low, but regularly they're not a heck of a lot more. So absolutely buy it. That is my recommendation for your starting point.
Yep. Hey, Steven, it's the weekend. We're having fun, but I got to do other stuff. So, and you think we're done for today?
I agree 100%. So that is taking us to the end of episode number 37 of Better Podcasting. For episode 37, I'm Stephen John Drew. Can't believe that it was so long ago that we had our episode 1.
And I'm Stargate Pioneer. Once again, having fun doing hobby podcasting.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Better Podcasting. We want to hear from you. You can find all of our contact information at betterpodcasting.com. If you like the show, please consider giving us a 5-star review in iTunes. We encourage you to check out all of the other geeky podcasts available at GonnaGeekNetwork.com. This has been a Gonna Geek production. Thanks for listening, and we will see you again next week.